John Denver was more than a singer. He was the gentle voice that carried America back to the roots of nature, peace, and home. With his guitar in hand, he turned simple words into hymns of belonging. Songs like "Take Me Home," "Country Roads," and "Rocky Mountain High" became anthems for generations searching for comfort. His wire-rimmed glasses, bright smile, and soft tenor voice made him appear untouchable, as if no darkness could reach him. But beneath the songs lived a man whose life was far more turbulent than fans ever imagined. He struggled with loneliness, clashed with his strict upbringing, battled his own inner storms, and eventually met a fate so shocking and preventable that it still haunts the music world. This is not just the story of a folk singer. This is the story of how light and shadow lived side by side in John Denver, and how his final flight revealed the danger of a dream that became an obsession. John Denver was not born into ease or certainty. He entered the world on December 31st, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico, as Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., the son of a decorated U.S. Air Force pilot. His father, Captain Henry Dutch Deutschendorf, was a man of discipline and prestige, setting speed records in the B-58 Hustler bomber and eventually entering the Air Force Hall of Fame. But military excellence came at a cost. For John, growing up in a household ruled by strict order and frequent relocations meant that childhood never felt steady. Before he turned 10, he had lived in Arizona, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas, always uprooted, just as he started to feel at home. That instability left him shy, uncertain, and lonely. Then came the gift that altered the course of his life. At 11, while living in Tucson, Arizona, his grandmother handed him an antique 1910 Gibson guitar. For the boy who felt like he belonged nowhere, the instrument became a compass. Strumming its strings gave him not only music, but also a sense of identity. Soon he joined the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, where he learned the harmony and presence that would one day carry him across the world. In high school, he began performing folk songs at small venues. Each performance was not just about music. It was about finding a voice in a world that often made him feel invisible. Yet the shadow of his father loomed large. Dutch demanded perfection in every task, from grades to behavior, and his son's gentle spirit clashed with the harsh military code. Their relationship was strained, defined by expectations John could never fully meet. Still, there was one fragile bridge between them: flying. Under his father's guidance, John learned to pilot small aircraft. For a moment, the sky became a place where father and son found peace together. Neither of them could know that the same skies would later hold the secret to John's most dangerous passion and his most tragic end. Even then, John's restlessness was clear. He enrolled at Texas Tech University to study architecture, but lecture halls and blueprints never stirred his heart. Music, however, consumed him. He formed a local folk group called the Alpine Trio, and every time he held his guitar, he felt closer to the life he was destined to live. Slowly, he realized that the path to his future wasn't through drafting tables or military approval, it was through the songs he carried inside him. By the mid-1960s, John Denver found himself standing at a crossroads. His time at Texas Tech University, where he had been studying architecture, was slipping away as music pulled him with irresistible force. Nights spent playing with the Alpine Trio had convinced him that his destiny was not in blueprints or lecture halls, but in songs and stages. Restless and determined, he made the bold decision to leave school behind and head west to Los Angeles, a city bursting with ambition, guitars, and young dreamers, all chasing the same elusive spotlight. In that crowded scene, John was just another hopeful with a guitar case in hand. But unlike many, he carried both discipline and persistence, traits forged under his father's stern gaze. His patience was soon tested when he auditioned to replace Chad Mitchell in the well-known Chad Mitchell Trio, a popular folk group of the time. More than 200 singers lined up for the chance, but against staggering odds, John was chosen. That moment became his first true break. Touring the country with the group and recording 3 albums, he refined his voice, sharpened his stage presence, and learned the craft of commanding an audience. The trio was his training ground, but something deeper stirred within him. He wanted to write his own songs, to put his heart into words and melodies that belonged to no one else. During a lonely layover in a Washington, D.C. airport, he picked up his guitar and began writing a song he initially titled "Babe, I Hate to Go." It captured the ache of leaving, the bittersweet weight of farewell. The song might have disappeared into obscurity had fate not intervened. Peter, Paul, and Mary, already among the most respected folk groups in America, recorded their version of the song under a new name, "Leaving on a Jet Plane." By December 1969, their cover had soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, giving John Denver the validation he desperately needed. Suddenly, the quiet Air Force boy, who once felt invisible, had written words sung in millions of homes. The success marked the beginning of a transformation. He realized that Deutschendorf was too cumbersome a name for the music world, too heavy to carry into the spotlight. At the suggestion of industry insiders, and inspired by the mountains he adored, he adopted a new name, John Denver, taken from Colorado's capital. It was simple, approachable, and perfectly matched the image of open skies and natural beauty that would define his career. By the end of the 1960s, he was no longer just another hopeful strummer in Los Angeles. He was a songwriter whose work had topped the charts, an artist with a stage name that fit like a second skin, and a man on the cusp of something far greater. The momentum was building, and soon it would launch him into a stardom no one could have predicted. As the 1970s dawned, John Denver was ready to step out of the shadow of groups and collaborations and into the light of his own solo career. The name change had already begun to work its magic. John Denver carried with it the crisp air of the mountains, the simplicity of open fields, and the kind of approachable familiarity that the public instantly embraced. He was no longer Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., the shy boy weighed down by a military name, but John Denver, a figure whose music would become synonymous with peace, nature, and home. His first few solo albums in the late 1960s gained modest attention, but it was clear he had something more, something that needed only the right moment to ignite. That moment arrived in 1971 with the release of Poems, Prayers, and Promises. On that record sat a song that would soon define not only his career, but also an entire era of folk country music. Take Me Home, Country Roads. Co-written with Bill Danoff and Taffy Nivert, the track had initially faced hurdles. Early recordings suffered from technical problems, and there were doubts that it would resonate with audiences. Yet Denver's manager, Jerry Weintraub, saw something in the simple melody and heartfelt lyrics, and he pushed relentlessly to get it played on radio stations, starting in Denver, Colorado. It was a gamble that paid off. Released in April 1971, the song climbed slowly but surely, reaching #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 by late summer. Its success was more than commercial, it was cultural. The chorus of Longing for Home resonated across boundaries, speaking to soldiers overseas, workers far from their families, and anyone who had ever felt the ache of belonging elsewhere. By the end of that year, the song had gone gold, and over time, it would become one of the most enduring anthems of American music, eventually adopted as one of West Virginia's official state songs. The success of Country Roads propelled Denver into the spotlight, but it was only the beginning. His sixth studio album, Rocky Mountain High, released in 1972, solidified his identity as the musical voice of nature and the American wilderness. Inspired by his love for Colorado, the title track captured the beauty of mountain life and the transcendence he found in its landscapes. The song reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, and decades later, it would be recognized as one of Colorado's official state songs, forever tying his name to the land he adored. By the mid-1970s, Denver's career had caught fire in ways few could have predicted. His image, long blonde hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a gentle smile, and embroidered Western shirts made him instantly recognizable, not just as a singer but as a cultural symbol. He wasn't edgy or rebellious like many of his contemporaries. Instead, he radiated sincerity and warmth, something millions of listeners craved during an era filled with social change and uncertainty. With the world finally listening, John Denver had been reborn, not just in name, but in spirit, and he was now poised to become one of the most beloved solo artists of his generation. By the mid-1970s, John Denver had become far more than a rising star. He was a household name, a cultural touchstone whose music bridged generations. The release of Poems, Prayers, and Promises had opened the door, but it was what came next that launched him into the stratosphere. In just a few short years, he achieved a level of dominance that few artists in any genre could claim. Between 1974 and 1975, he released a string of hits that seemed unstoppable, each one carving itself into the soundtrack of American life. Sunshine on My Shoulders, a gentle meditation on warmth and hope, became his first #1 single in March 1974. Just a few months later came Annie's Song, written in only 10 minutes as a love letter to his wife Annie Martell. It soared to #1 in July of that year, cementing his reputation as a songwriter who could capture the most intimate emotions in the simplest language. Then came Thank God I'm a Country Boy in May 1975, a rollicking celebration of rural life, followed by I'm Sorry in September of the same year. 4 #1 singles in just 18 months, an achievement almost unheard of at the time. These hits weren't isolated successes. His albums dominated the charts as well. His 1973 Greatest Hits compilation became RCA's best-selling album of all time, surpassing even Elvis Presley, a staggering testament to just how deeply his songs resonated with audiences. Back Home Again, released in 1974, went triple platinum, and Wind Song in 1975 went double platinum. At his peak, Denver was one of the most commercially successful recording artists on the planet, selling out stadiums, hosting television specials, and becoming a familiar face in millions of households. His image became iconic. The long hair, the wire-rimmed glasses, the embroidered Western shirts, the ever-present smile. He was marketed as America's golden boy, a clean-cut counterpoint to the rebellious rock stars of the same era. RCA leaned heavily into his image, positioning him not just as a singer, but as a symbol of wholesomeness and natural beauty. Yet what truly made him resonate with fans was not marketing, it was sincerity. When John Denver sang about sunshine, mountains, and home, people believed him. They felt the authenticity in his voice and the warmth in his words. To his audience, he wasn't just performing songs, he was sharing pieces of himself. And in a turbulent decade, marked by political scandal, war, and cultural upheaval, his music provided a safe haven, a reminder of simpler joys and timeless values. By the time he stood on stage in the mid-1970s, hearing thousands sing his words back to him, John Denver had reached the height of his stardom. But success, as it often does, came with cracks that began to form quietly behind the polished surface. By the late 1970s, John Denver was no longer just a folk country singer. He was a global celebrity whose reach extended far beyond radio. Hollywood came calling, and in 1977, he made his acting debut in the film Oh God, alongside comedy legend George Burns. Directed by Carl Reiner, the movie cast Denver as an ordinary grocery store manager chosen by God to deliver a divine message. Though he had no formal acting experience, his natural sincerity and charm carried the role, and the film became a surprise box office success, grossing more than $50 million in the United States and earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay. It proved Denver could hold his own on screen, though he never pursued acting with the same fervor as music. Television also became a key part of his empire. His 1975 special An Evening with John Denver won a Primetime Emmy, and throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, he hosted numerous specials that were broadcast internationally, bringing his music and his wholesome image into millions of homes. In the United Kingdom and across Europe, carefully orchestrated TV appearances arranged by his manager, Jerry Weintraub, made him an even bigger star. His long blonde hair, boyish grin, and embroidered Western shirts designed by Anna Zapp became trademarks that symbolized innocence nature, and sincerity. Yet while his professional image soared, his personal life began to fracture. His marriage to Annie Martel, the woman who had inspired Annie's song, was crumbling under the strain of fame. Friends recalled that Annie often felt overshadowed by his career, and though the public saw them as the perfect couple, behind closed doors, tension simmered. By 1982, the marriage ended in divorce, and the separation revealed a darker side of Denver. Stories emerged of violent tempers, including one infamous incident where he used a chainsaw to cut their marital bed in half after an argument. It was a shocking contrast to the gentle, smiling man the world adored. Professionally, challenges also mounted. The music industry was shifting rapidly toward new sounds dominated by synthesizers and pop trends of the 1980s. Denver's folk country style, once perfectly in tune with the public mood, was now seen as dated. RCA, his label for more than 25 years, grew impatient despite his history of platinum records and massive sales. In 1986, they made a stunning decision. John Denver was dropped. For an artist who had outsold Elvis Presley at one point in his career, it was a devastating blow. He had just completed what he believed would be his next breakthrough album, One World. But instead of a triumphant release, he found himself cast aside as irrelevant. The man who had once dominated charts and filled arenas was suddenly struggling to find his place in a new musical landscape. Behind the fame and the cameras, John Denver's world was beginning to unravel, and the cracks in his golden image were only widening. For John Denver, flying was more than a pastime. It was freedom, escape, and the one place he felt fully in control. Trained by his father, he earned certifications for single-engine planes, multi-engine aircraft, and gliders, eventually logging over 2,700 hours in the air. Friends often remarked that Denver seemed most alive when at the controls of an aircraft, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his hands steady on the yoke. But what began as a shared passion between father and son slowly became an obsession that carried dangerous undertones. By the early 1990s, turbulence had entered nearly every corner of his life. Personally, his second marriage to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney had unraveled after years of volatility, ending in 1993. Delaney later described Denver as jealous, controlling, and emotionally abusive, claims that painted a far darker picture than the wholesome image fans had embraced. Professionally, he was struggling to remain relevant in a music industry that had moved on from his brand of folk country, and legally, he was beginning to attract the wrong kind of attention. In 1993, he was arrested for driving under the influence, resulting in probation, fines, and a painful mark against his record. The following year, in 1994, he crashed his Porsche into a tree while allegedly intoxicated again. These repeated incidents brought the scrutiny of the Federal Aviation Administration. Pilots are required to maintain a valid medical certificate to fly legally, and Denver's alcohol-related arrests raised questions about whether he was fit to remain in the cockpit. For a man whose identity was intertwined with flight, the investigation was devastating. By 1997, the FAA revoked his medical certificate outright, grounding him from flying until he could prove his sobriety through testing and compliance. But John Denver refused to accept the decision. For months, he ignored certified letters from the FAA, exploiting bureaucratic loopholes to delay the process. When he finally accepted the letter, he knew every flight he took afterward was illegal. Still, he continued to fly, defiant and unwilling to let go of the sky. His pattern of risk-taking became more apparent during this time. He was known to switch off glider engines mid-air to push planes to their limits, and he often took unnecessary chances that alarmed those closest to him. Combined with his personal struggles, failed marriages, reports of violent temper and substance abuse, his flights became less a symbol of freedom and more a dangerous reflection of the turmoil inside him. John Denver was unraveling. His image as America's gentle balladeer had cracked wide open, replaced by stories of reckless behavior and private rage. And yet, even as he stumbled, he clung tighter to the one thing that had always given him peace: the cockpit. The skies had once been his sanctuary. Now they were becoming his greatest risk. By the mid-1990s, John Denver's life was a portrait of contradictions. On one hand, he remained beloved by fans who clung to his timeless hits, filling theaters and venues whenever he performed. On the other, his personal revelations and reckless choices painted a darker, more complicated picture of the man behind the music. In 1994, he released his autobiography, Take Me Home, a book that shocked many who had long viewed him as America's wholesome balladeer. Within its pages, Denver admitted to drug use, infidelity, and violent outbursts. He spoke of marijuana, LSD, and cocaine, of cheating on his wives, and of moments of explosive rage, including the infamous story of sawing a bed in half with a chainsaw during an argument. Fans who had cherished him as a gentle folk hero were confronted with a man they barely recognized, a man torn between light and shadow. Professionally, Denver pressed forward, but personally, he grew more unpredictable. His marriage to Cassandra Delaney had ended bitterly in 1993, leaving behind accusations that he was jealous and controlling, and accounts from staff who described him as terrifying. The gentle face that smiled from album covers now stood in contrast with whispers of volatility and pain. And yet, through it all, his obsession with flying only deepened. Even after the FAA stripped him of his medical certificate, Denver continued to pilot aircraft illegally, refusing to accept a grounded life. For him, the sky was not negotiable. The danger did not end with legal defiance. In 1997, he purchased a sleek experimental aircraft known as a Long EZ, designed by engineer Bert Rutan. The plane was innovative and efficient, but it carried serious risks, especially for an inexperienced pilot. The most troubling flaw was the placement of the fuel selector valve. Instead of being easily reachable, it was installed behind the pilot's left shoulder, requiring dangerous twisting mid-flight to switch tanks. Worse still, some pilots had reported needing pliers to operate it. Denver was warned about the risk, told that the design demanded absolute familiarity before taking it into the skies. But warnings did little to deter him. To John, the thrill of flying outweighed the fear of risk. His friends and family worried as he pushed further into defiance, ignoring the restrictions, ignoring the pleas, and choosing instead to chase freedom where he had always felt most alive. On the ground, he seemed restless, burdened by a shifting career and a fractured personal life. In the air, he was still John Denver, the boy who had once looked to the horizon with his father, who had found peace in the hum of engines and the vast openness of the sky. But the obsession that had begun as a bridge between father and son was now steering him directly into danger, and soon it would prove fatal. On October 12, 1997, John Denver arrived at the Monterey Peninsula Airport in California, eager to take his newly purchased Long EZ experimental aircraft into the skies. He had only bought the plane the day before and had little experience flying its heavily modified design. The weather that afternoon was perfect, the sky clear, the horizon open, the kind of day that once symbolized freedom to him. But freedom would turn to tragedy in a matter of minutes. The Long EZ was a sleek machine, admired by aviation enthusiasts for its efficiency, but it carried one fatal flaw. The fuel selector valve was positioned awkwardly behind the pilot's left shoulder, forcing the flyer to twist dangerously in midair to reach it. Denver had been warned of this flaw and had been advised to familiarize himself with the controls before attempting serious flights. Instead, determined and defiant, he pressed on. At 5:27 p.m., after practicing several landings, Denver's last words to air traffic control came across the radio. "Do you have it now?" Moments later, the plane climbed sharply, stalled, and plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Witnesses reported hearing a loud pop before the aircraft hit the water, nose first. The impact killed him instantly. Toxicology reports revealed no drugs or alcohol in his system, silencing speculation that substance abuse had played a role. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation concluded that he had likely run one fuel tank dry and lost control while attempting to switch to the other in mid-air. The awkward placement of the valve, combined with his lack of familiarity with the aircraft and the dangerously low fuel he carried, only 9 gallons, made recovery impossible. In the end, it was not recklessness in the form of intoxication, nor sabotage, nor hidden mechanical failure. It was a preventable mistake born of poor design, impatience, and his refusal to wait. The world that mourned his passing was left to grapple with the irony. A man whose songs carried messages of peace and grounding had been taken by the very skies he loved. John Denver's death shocked millions. Tributes poured in from across the globe, from fans, fellow musicians, and even political leaders who recognized the way his music had woven itself into the cultural fabric. Songs like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Rocky Mountain High, and Annie's Song were sung in memorials, played on radio stations, and remembered not as mere hits, but as hymns of longing, love, and belonging. His voice, which once echoed with the beauty of nature and the promise of home, now carried an unshakable reminder of fragility. Yet his legacy endures. Decades after his final flight, John Denver's songs continue to live in classrooms, concerts, and family gatherings. They remain anthems for road trips, lullabies for children, and comfort for those far from home. His story is both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. A man who gave the world timeless music, but was undone by an obsession he could never let go of. Behind the gentle smile and soothing voice was a restless spirit, and in the end, that restlessness took him too soon. Even now, fans look back and ask themselves the same haunting question: how could a life that brought so much light be lost in such a preventable shadow?